There are two types of people, those who pick OK Computer, those who pick Kid A. It largely depends on which album you heard first, which one introduced you to Radiohead. So for me it was OK Computer, which was actually the second album I've ever bought with my own money. It came out in 1997 and that summer I also got my first computer. Please share your own story in the comments below, I love reading those, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. As a kid I was familiar with a lot of sounds that eventually all shaped me, but I was too small to be a conscious music listener, so it all changed around like 96-97. The first one that changed it was Kula Shaker, the British neo-psychedelic band that was like ripping off everything that came out in the 60s, and the second was Radiohead, which I thought back then was like nothing I've heard before, which wasn't entirely true, but as a child I was too inexperienced to make the connections. It took years of music listening and growing as a person to become more aware of history of sounds, but it doesn't change the fact that I still consider Radiohead a groundbreaking band in their own right, and people call them the last big visionaries of rock music, and also I agree with that. Actually, I remember this whole album OK Computer sounded too difficult for me back then. It took me some time before I managed to listen to all of it. So what are my impressions 25 years later? Let's see. The first contact is Airbag, starts like a product of its times. A 90s indie rock, medium tempo song where the biggest initial takeaways are the howling voice of Thom Yorke and a distorted guitar solo. In the last minute, howling intensifies, while the musical background becomes everything at once. So I think this is what would alienate the casual radio listener. Paranoid Android is one of the most famous songs from Radiohead, one of the biggest hits from this album. From a time perspective, I hear something that I couldn't hear before. How deeply this song and generally this whole album is rooted in the art rock of the late 60s and early 70s. David Bowie was like the first thing that came to my mind, but also the Beatles, Pink Floyd, Todd Rundgren, Velvet Underground. And for many people, myself included, this is the best era in the history of music. Peak of creativity, combining genres, melting pot of ideas, and generally the highest quality before it all like washed down and stepped aside to make space for something different. And while listening to OK Computer, I had the impression it could have been recorded in that era and it would be still among the best ones. And obviously it's a compliment. Obviously you will still hear whatever came after, echo of grunge in particular. It's not some exact copy. So after I wrote down my thoughts, I went to Wikipedia and I found out that Paranoid Android in the first version was over 14 minutes long, and Thom Yorke said it would sound like a Pink Floyd cover. Also, the Beatles, Queen and Pixies were mentioned as inspirations, so I was reading it with a grin on my face about how much musical knowledge I did gain over those 25 years. Subterranean Homesick Alien continues with the same vibe, and the title is actually homage to Bob Dylan. One thing I don't agree while reading Wikipedia is that it was supposed to sound like Miles Davis' Bitches Brew, and I can't hear any Miles Davis whatsoever. If you can, please enlighten me, because I don't. The next surprise I had, I didn't remember how good exit music was. Apparently it was inspired by Romeo and Juliet, that they should have escaped before all the things started to go bad. And from the musical standpoint, it was inspired by the other great British head of the 90s, Portishead. Try listening to that song, but imagine listening to a bass voice instead of Thom Yorke and you'll see that it would still fit. Let Down clearly takes from the sweet melodic pop of the 60s and filters it through sentimentality. It's incredibly pretty and catchy and ends with some weird computer sound. Karma Police ends this first part of the album and the song is so overplayed I didn't think I would be able to catch something new, something enlightening, but in fact I did. At the first part with the voice and the piano, it sounds like something the Beatles could have recorded. It made me wonder what would be if Thom Yorke was the singer for the Beatles. I think that they would be more spicy, more unique, but also less popular. Is what you get.
this is what you'll get.
Fitter Happier is that part where I was listening in the past. What the hell am I listening to? I know, it's a music concrete track in the middle of an art rock album, and it's also not out of the place because even the Beatles were interested in electroacoustic. Electioneering changes the mood completely. It's actually an energetic, anthemic rock song, and this was the moment where I thought Muse was in fact a discounted version of Radiohead. I did say a lot about inspirations drawn from the Beatles and the others, but literally Radiohead are among the best of this art rock league, while Muse is essentially a version of Radiohead with all the difficult moments removed. Yeah, clearly not gaining points from the Muse fans, this was my impression. The next two songs fit nicely one after another. Climbing Up the Walls is full of noise and unrest, but it's also extremely melodic and definitely not too hard to digest, but back in the day obviously it was. No Surprises has this nursery rhythm, and you would think it's another overplayed song, but in this part of the album it just fits perfectly, making it even more beautiful than it already was. And now I wouldn't be able to decipher it was supposed to replicate the mood of Louis Armstrong and Marvin Gaye. To me it just sounds British, very British. The ending of the album, while still good, it sounds to me like a longer outro, because this No Surprises was like the biggest reward, the biggest like build up and peak, and everything else just is supposed to bring you out of the album. That's how I see it. Generally, listening to OK Computer made me think like I was listening to one of these last rock bands that had something to add to the game, that they did take whatever was created before and they took it even further. Quality-wise, I'm surprised how pretty and accessible this album was, while at the same time not being stupid, not being dumbed down to the audience, and not being a one-trick pony. The rating could be only one correct. And I will be happy if you wrote your thoughts in the comments below, and I will see you next time.